About 30. Sorry about that, just having a quick snack before our lesson today. We will be talking about hormones that affect your blood sugar and hormones that affect your stress today. So last lesson we discussed generalizations around hormones. We talked about some of the main glands, right? Some of the main pituitary hormones, generally what hormones do, how they work, but now we're going to get into the real specifics. So first two hormones we're going to discuss are insulin and glucagon. Now these two hormone loops, there's a variety of ways you can do these feedback loops, but these two hormone loops do not involve the hypothalamus or pituitary. So you'll notice in these loops, there's no hypothalamus, there's no pituitary, it's just the pancreas. So for this particular loop, the stimulus or the thing that will cause the release of insulin is an increase in blood glucose levels. So essentially you just ate something. You ate some food, probably some carbohydrates, they got broken down by your digestive system, went into your blood, and your blood sugar went up. If it goes past homeostasis, your pancreas will activate, and specifically it will be the beta cells that will activate. Now, they're called islet cells or islet of Langerhans, which is a fun one to say. And there's two different types. There's beta and there's alpha cells. So the beta cells produce the hormone insulin, as you can see there. Now, with insulin, insulin is a non-targeting hormone. So insulin is going to essentially affect most of your body cells, especially liver and muscle cells. Now, what's going to happen here is the body cells that are affected will do a few things. Number one, most body cells, when they get affected by insulin, they will take in more glucose. So that's going to be step number one. We are going to take in more glucose. When we take in more glucose, that'll help with cell respiration, that'll make us more energy, and ultimately, it'll lower our blood sugar levels. Now, if that's not enough, step number two, we're going to take some of that glucose and we are converting it into glycogen, which is a storage form of glucose. We're going to store it in our liver and our muscles. Now, if that's enough to get us back to homeostasis, perfect. Okay, we're done. But if the glucose levels are still too high, we go to step number three. And step number three is we might convert some of that glucose into adipose fat tissue. So, three ways we lower our blood sugar levels. We are going to increase the uptake of cells to increase our glucose reuptake into our cells. We are going to convert glucose to glycogen, and we are going to convert glucose into fat. All of these things should lower our blood glucose levels, and when they do, this will cause a negative feedback to be sent to the pancreas, where the pancreas will now turn off insulin, and then the effects will no longer be present. So that's what happens when you have high blood sugar. What about low blood sugar? So this would be, you're hungry, you just did some physical activity. What happens then? Well, similar setup. So the stimulus would be decrease in blood glucose, but now it's going to be the alpha cells that activate. So the alpha cells are going to activate, still pancreas cells, but they're going to produce a different hormone called glucagon. Now, glucagon is essentially going to do the opposite of insulin. So glucagon is going to increase blood sugar levels. So how are we going to do that? We are going to take that stored glycogen in our liver and our muscles, and we're going to convert it into glucose. So that's going to be step number one. Step number two is, if that's not enough and we still need more glucose, we're going to start to break down fat. Remember, fat is a long-term storage of energy. So if we need more energy, we're going to convert that fat into glucose. These processes should raise our blood glucose levels back to normal, which would cause a negative feedback and turn off our pancreas. So here's the whole thing put together. This is a nice diagram showing everything kind of put together. So homeostasis in the middle. If blood sugar gets too high, we then have insulin coming from our pancreas. Insulin is going to cause glucose to be taken in by our cells. Insulin is going to cause glucose to be stored as glycogen in our liver and our muscles, and insulin is going to cause glucose to be turned into fat. All of these activities, these processes, should bring us back to homeostasis. which will then negatively feed back to the pancreas and say, all right, we don't need insulin anymore, you can turn off the insulin. If our blood sugar gets too low, pancreas activates again. This time it's glucagon being produced, and glucagon is going to do the opposite of insulin. So they're actually what we call antagonistic hormones. They're opposites of one another. So one will work for high blood sugar, one will work for low. Glucagon will then take the glycogen we've stored in our liver and our muscles and start to turn it back into glucose. It may also take some of the fat we've stored and turn that into glucose as well, which should bring us back to homeostasis, which will then have a negative feedback to our pancreas. Now, that's where the hormones come from. So insulin and glucagon, they come from the pancreas, so beta cells and alpha cells, and that's what they do. The third thing we always need to look at for hormones is disorders. Now, you can have, hypoglycemia, that's low blood sugar, right? Low blood sugar. That's more so an issue with your glucagon. But the main issue or the main disorder when it comes to the pancreas would be diabetes. Now, diabetes mellitus is twofold here. It's either an inadequate level of insulin, so you just don't produce enough insulin, or your body no longer responds to insulin. So you still make it, but your body just won't respond to it anymore. In either case, you get a condition called hyperglycemia, where the glucose remains in your blood and does not go into your cells. So someone with diabetes mellitus would actually be very, very tired. They'd have low energy. They would also produce a lot of urine. Because what happens is all that glucose has to go somewhere. If it's not going into your cells, it's staying in your blood, it's being filtered by your kidneys, and then as it's leaving in your urine, it's gonna pull some water with it. It's gonna dehydrate you, you're gonna lose water, and you're gonna be thirsty quite often. Now, like I also said, you're gonna have low energy levels. You might think, but you have high blood sugar. How can you have low energy levels? Well, think about it like this. The glucose is not going into your cells. If it doesn't go into your cells, you can't make the ATP through cell respiration. So what's gonna happen here is you're gonna have low energy levels. You're probably gonna have to start to break down proteins and fats as an alternative source of energy. And if your diabetes goes unmanaged, you can get what's called diabetic nerve pain, where too much glucose interferes with the capillary walls. You could even damage your neurons, and even in extreme cases, you could even go blind or even have sometimes a foot amputated because there's so much nerve damage. That's, of course, if the diabetes is unmanaged. Now, there's two different types of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes. This is something you're born with. So it's a genetic condition. You inherit it from your parents. Essentially, you cannot produce adequate insulin, no fault of your own. And for the rest of your life, you'll probably have to take insulin shots. Now, there's a lot of cool technologies nowadays to help with this. You can have apps, like you can have your phone that will literally, you get a device put into your arm here and you hold your phone up above that device and it'll tell your blood sugar readings on your phone, which is really cool. You can keep track of your sugar that way. There's a whole lot of technologies nowadays that do help with type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, this is adult onset diabetes where you actually develop it as an adult. So this usually happens, it could be a little genetic, but mostly it's diet and lifestyle. And you basically become what's called pre-diabetic, where your body just doesn't respond to insulin anymore. It stops responding to the insulin you're producing. And if nothing is done, you may then become type 2 diabetic, where you're gonna have to take medications to help your body manage your blood sugar and your blood glucose levels. There is a third type of diabetes, it's called gestational. Generally, it affects 3 to 20% of pregnancies. This is type 2 diabetes. Well, yes, type 2 diabetes while you're pregnant. Now, the good news is, as long as you keep track of your diet, you're careful with what you're eating, you make sure you manage your insulin levels, it will be temporary. Once the pregnancy is over, that will go away and the baby won't have any issues anyway, or won't have any issues either. But if you do nothing, there is an increased risk that you do develop type 2 diabetes and your baby develops type 2 diabetes. So there are tests for this. They test for gestational diabetes, usually later into the pregnancy. And then if you do find that you have it, then under supervision of your doctor, just keep a careful eye on what you're eating, and then you and baby should be just fine. So the next two feedback loops we're going to look at are stress feedback loops. So this one is going to be for a short-term stress situation. This is going to be something like a fight or flight response, right? We've talked about this before. This would be an immediate, you're in danger, or your body thinks it's in danger. What are we going to do about it? So the first step here is the hypothalamus is going to send a nerve signal, an action potential, all the way down to the adrenal glands. There's no intermediate, there's no pituitary gland, we gotta move quickly here. So basically the hypothalamus sends a nerve signal straight to the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands can be broken down into the adrenal cortex and medulla. So the adrenal medulla is what secretes adrenaline and noradrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now these two hormones work as like a team, so I always put them together. They always work as a team, and they're gonna give you your fight or flight response. So they're gonna give you things like increase in blood glucose, increase in heart rate, increase in breathing, changing of blood flow patterns, all the things associated with a fight or flight response. Once your body has resisted that short-term stress and the stressor might be over, your parasympathetic system takes over. So you go back to the hypothalamus, so we negatively feed back to the hypothalamus. We stop sending the nerve signal and the adrenal gland turns off. And now we no longer produce epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, if the stressor is more of a long-term stressor, so this is something that's been, your body's under longer stress for longer periods of time, right? Prolonged stress, we're gonna have a different response here. So now we're gonna have the hypothalamus. It's going to release a hormone that's going to activate the pituitary. So the anterior pituitary is gonna produce the hormone ACTH. Now ACTH is gonna travel to the adrenal cortex this time, and we're gonna produce two different hormones here. Now we're gonna produce a mineralocorticoid, also known as aldosterone. It's gonna target your blood pressure, your water levels, your sodium levels. It's gonna increase your blood pressure, help you resist that stress. And then the main long-term stress hormone is going to be a glucocorticoid, cortisol. Cortisol is your long-term stress hormone. What it does is it actually breaks down your fat and your proteins to give you more glucose. The whole point of this is to increase your blood pressure, so your blood travels faster, gets oxygen where it needs to go, and increase your blood sugar so you can resist the stressor, right? What you don't want is your body going into a situation where you cannot handle the stress anymore. That's gonna be problematic. So what's gonna happen is the cortisol specifically is gonna give you more energy, give you more blood sugar, and help you better resist that stressor. Ideally, the stressor is finished, right? Ideally, the stressor is gone. So then we're gonna have a negative feedback signal sent back to our hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is going to turn off the releasing hormone, so no more releasing hormone. That in turn will turn off the ACTH, and if there's no more ACTH, this in turn will turn off the cortisol as well as the aldosterone. So once again, think of it kind of like a cascade, a waterfall, light switches, whatever way you want to think about it, it works. You always start at the top, turn off the first hormone, then the second, then the third, and you turn off this feedback loop. Once, of course, your body's back to homeostasis. So here's the two loops put together. For a short-term stressor, it's the hypothalamus going through your spinal cord. This is a nerve signal, not a hormone, going right to the adrenal gland. There's the inner medulla, making your epinephrine and your norepinephrine. So that's a short-term fight or flight response. Long-term, we see a releasing hormone from the hypothalamus down to the anterior pituitary. ACTH is released into the bloodstream, travels to the cortex, which is the outer part of the adrenal gland, and then down it releases your aldosterone, right? So that's going to impact your sodium and your water retention, and then your cortisol, which is your main long-term stress hormone. Stress disorders, for short term, there's not a lot of short term. I suppose if there was a problem with your epinephrine, like you had too much epinephrine, yes, maybe that would be a short term stressor or a short term stress disorder, possibly caused by a tumor, it could lead to increased heart rate, heart problems, blood pressure problems. But the main disorder here would be Addison's disease. Addison's disease is an adrenal problem. So it means you lack cortisol, you lack aldosterone, you have a problem with your adrenal gland. And because of that, we're gonna have a lot of symptoms like chronic fatigue, muscle weakness, loss of appetite, weight loss, electrolyte imbalance. And the thing is, if nothing is done about it, it could lead into death if nothing is done. But obviously, if you find out you have Addison's disease, you would manage it and know that, okay, I have low adrenal hormones. What am I gonna do about that? Chronic stress, also not good for you as well. It can lead to high blood pressure, high levels of cortisol are not ideal because if you have prolonged high levels of cortisol, it may result once again in heart problems, blood pressure problems, even diabetes, because you're going to get that spike in blood sugar all the time. So once again, prolonged chronic stress, not great for you either. So that's a lot of hormones to cover for right now. So we've done insulin, we've done glucagon, we've done epinephrine, norepinephrine, and we've done cortisol. Next lesson, we're going to get into metabolism hormones, so hormones that affect your metabolic rate. So thanks again for watching, and we'll chat soon.